What's next? So we talked about RFP proposal, IO. We obviously have not talked about invoice. First thing I wanted to ask the panel was, what about invoice? Where do you see that coming in? It's not part of the beta because we didn't put out the XML, but I'm sure that's the first question you're going to get from a lot of people. What about the invoice? Isn't that where the billing problems are occurring? Isn't that where, how are we going to get paid faster? We need the invoice.
Well, MediaBank is going to pilot with the first phase of an invoice, and what we're doing is we're capturing the electronic invoice, just how it's working today with the workflow today. So that's probably a good starting point for this, but what we need to do is kind of, at least from our representation, is kind of work backwards to make sure that we can connect that invoice, to the order, and work on the workflow and make sure that the schema is in line with all of the other schema that are in there to make sure that it's seamless from RFP all the way up to invoice.
So Mark, with the pilot invoice, how does a publisher plug into that?
We have a WSDL, so by web service there'll be an electronic transfer into that, and then we published our version of the invoice schema, which borrowed some of the data elements anywhere that we could from the existing schema to try and make it as close to possible as we can as a comparison as a starting point.
So you've got an XML input that from a schema, or an Excel spreadsheet, or
it's an XML schema. Right.
Got it. Great.
I think
Kelly.
that, one of the things that I took away from this morning's conversations is that it's all about the discrepancy resolution process and making that go away, because everyone needs more time in their day if we're going to scale this industry. So how do you get rid of discrepancies? Well, first, you make sure the numbers match, and the impression exchange is directly dealing with that. Then you make sure that what the agency thought they bought is what you sold them. And that's what this e-business process is actually about. So until we handle revisions and IOs well, that's always going to be a portion of where the discrepancies are at. Finally, it's making sure that the invoice is set up in a way that the agency wants and the sales system can send. Not to mention that on the sales side, your sales ordering system has to be connected to your invoicing system without a person in the middle. All of those things need to happen. Transferring the data in XML format is the last piece of the puzzle. Moving the data seamlessly between the buy and the sell side of an invoice is great. So what I think I'm more interested in doing is making sure that we have the right conversations to tackle the bigger problems. I would love it to see an XML standard come out of the work that MediaBank has done and have that adopted and incorporated by the IAB. I'd like to have that vetted by the right players, because at the agency, it's a different player than the media planner. It's maybe in a different office or a different company, maybe even in a different country. So there's a lot more conversations that I would want to see happen across all of the important people before we set a schema and a standard that we baited. But happy to participate in those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely, and we could even use that invoice to kind of kickstart that. I do think that there is some benefit to incrementally, get a flavor of out there to kind of cut down on the manual input. But we definitely need to have, discussions and, get on the same page and kind of work on that schema so it's all connected.
Right. Well, I think one of the things that happens is as you break down barriers and you increase efficiency, you also realize more quickly that maybe you have slightly different definitions of terms or understanding of things. So I think what will happen with that is we'll have to have more rounds of setting up standard, at least understanding everyone's view of terms and then trying to get standards. Things like, what is bill on contract? When do you reconcile? Is it at quarterly? Is it the end of the campaign? What really is a make good? How is gross and net supposed to be used? All of those things that I think, is another level that we could use some, standard definitions on and get both sides to agree on.
Right. And I would just add to that from our perspective as a publisher, internally, it's really different competencies. And in many cases, it is different systems. There's different groups handling invoicing. So whereas we see real value in moving forward with this, it's a really good way to do handshaking. And we see by the time we get to invoicing, that's really when we're doing embracing.